Okay, guys, welcome back. Good afternoon. We have around 4 minutes or so till we start. But hope you had a good spring break and that everything's going well. Just hang there for a few, and right around 12:45, about 3.5 minutes, we'll get rolling today. But yeah, welcome back. Here we are. Now it's April, so we just keep going forward. Hi, Kayla. Good to see you. So yeah, I hope you had a good break. I was just busy with all kinds of grading, and I got some time off, but I still had to teach a little bit because I have some classes over at Chapman University that has their spring break the previous week, so I still had to go in for that, but it was nice to have some time back. Welcome, everybody. Still got just about a minute, and then I'll get things going today. Hi, Austin. I'm here too. Hello. Leanne, Prue, good to see you guys. Teo, welcome back. Okay, guys, so it's pretty much now class time. I'm going to get things started. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much, as usual, for being here and for all your participation and hard work. Let me just start with a couple of brief notes. Have you guys noticed my my announcement that I delivered today through Canvas about the midterm grades? Let me know if you've seen it, and I'll just kind of address that really briefly. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. So I just notified everyone this morning by Canvas that I finished the grading of the midterm. So I was working on the grading and other tasks over the break. Now that's done. And as I've done before, I just ask you to simply send me an email request for your grade, and I'll reply to you within 2 days. So if you've already asked me for that grade, not to worry, you're in line, and I'll be sure to give you an email with detailed comments to report your grade back to you within 2 days. So yeah, that's the thing. We're done with the midterm. Grades are in, and you can check with me. But that's how I like to release scores, individually per request, so that I can give you detailed feedback on it, and that way I can kind of keep a rapport and a connection to each student individually. So yes, please do send me that message, and I'll be sure to reply back with your grade in short order. If not tomorrow, then at the latest on Thursday, in case you emailed me today. And I'll just keep clearing the inbox each day as I get these messages coming in. I just ask for that little buffer of time, as much as 2 days, because of all the other classes that I teach and the emails that I receive all the time. You guys, I think I've said it before, but I teach at a couple of institutions, multiple classes. I have 8 classes this semester as an example. So it's just, I try to stay on top of it. I'm always sure to keep to my word when I promise that I'll reply, but it just sometimes takes a day or two. So anyway, that's done. The next thing coming forward will be let's see, homework assignment number 2. Now, in the original schedule that you see listed from the syllabus, the due date of homework 2 was scheduled for, let me get it right, next Tuesday the 13th. And I'm just going to make a slight edit to that, and I'm going to shift it to the Thursday 15th. So I'll also send the instructions for homework 2 after class on Thursday, after next class, because we have to get through a little bit of the material in chapter 5 before you'll be prepared, I think, to complete that homework assignment. But anyways, just keeping you updated on the pace of the calendar and the schedule. Midterms are graded. Send me your email request for your score, and homework 2 I will assign on Thursday, and then it's going to be due next Thursday on the 15th. So that's just the place in the schedule where we're at, and just kind of to keep your head in the game. As usual, guys, please leave a comment behind in the chat if you can at any time, just to kind of keep the attendance record on file for me. And that's good. So let's just keep going. We have more material in the book and in this class to go through. So we're starting on a new chapter today, chapter 5 of the book, and that's going to be our main focus for about 2 weeks here, this week and then next week. On an unrelated note, I'm now fully vaccinated, which is nice, I guess, for me. I got the second whatever dose on Saturday, so yeah, I'm good to go now. Can't die or go to the hospital from COVID, which is nice. It's a real different kind of feeling after you've survived the pandemic, like we all have, to sort of realize that now you can walk around and you're not necessarily always fearful that the next man or woman around could breathe on you or pose a risk to your life from this virus. So just not having that little concern in the back of your mind, it's a great feeling. I certainly advise everybody when they're able to and when they're eligible, when it's convenient for them to get the vaccine. I got the Pfizer vaccine. I didn't have a choice, but that was the one that was available at the lot that I went to. But I'm happy with that because I've heard a lot of good reports about it being effective and protecting even better than some of the other options against mild to moderate illness. But they all protect 100% against hospitalization and death, which is what people really care the most about. But yeah, I didn't have any real side effects or anything to report. Certainly nothing that bad, maybe like minor fatigue, I guess, over the weekend. And I kind of felt loopy at times, but that's just, I don't know if that's just me. But anyway, yeah, so it was not too bad. That was good. Yeah, it was hard to just function on that one day. On Saturday, I just rested a lot. Sunday, though, I felt a little more normal. And then yesterday and today, I'm pretty much 100%. But anyway, guys, so just kind of throwing that out there. Let's go on now. I wanted to get us back into the book, so we have a new chapter that we're looking at, and that's chapter 5. And chapter 5 of our book is all about what are called fallacies. Okay, so fallacies, that's our new topic. We've covered some ground so far in the class. We started with just basic information about logic and argument. What is deduction? What is induction? What even is an argument? What is validity? What is soundness? All that sort of stuff. Oh yeah, Noah, now you've got the 5G, I guess, right? That's the joke. But yeah, I've already had a 5G phone, maybe better reception now. Anyway, though, yeah, we started with basic stuff about logic, deduction, and induction. Then we moved on to just the first chapter, which had to do with qualities of good critical thinkers, those famous social psychology experiments. What are some of the barriers or the obstacles to being a good critical thinker? What are some of the benefits of it? And then we talked about the language chapter, chapter 3. And then it was the knowledge chapter, chapter 4. now we're reaching chapter 5, and what that is about, as you see, it's all about fallacies. So what are fallacies, first of all? Okay, fallacies are basically when there's a problem in an argument, when the argument contains like a logical flaw or defect. So they're defective, bad, poor arguments, right? But the thing is, sometimes if you don't notice that the argument contains a fallacy, it can seem persuasive to you, and it might even manipulate or trick you into believing something that is not very well justified. So we want to be able to identify fallacies when we hear people speak them or write them. We want to also be able to guard against our own tendency to sometimes commit fallacies when we present information or arguments to other people. So good, solid, valid and sound and inductively strong arguments are great, but sometimes arguments are not as good, and that's when they contain these fallacies. So fallacies have been identified and named throughout the millennia, really. This goes back a long ways, discussions of logic. And we've therefore been able to identify a set of different fallacies that we can study, point out. And in the course of argument and dialogue with others, if someone commits a fallacy, you're not supposed to say, hey, great point. Rather, you're supposed to say, sorry, but you've just committed an ad hominem, or that's a red herring, or that's a straw man. And by saying this, you make mention to the person that their argument is invalid because it's fallacious. So we want to be the kind of people who are not misled, deceived, tricked, manipulated by fallacious reasoning, nor do we want to be the people who litter the world with a bunch of bad, fallacious arguments ourselves. So let's try and get that out there. Why do I not use Canvas? I do use Canvas. I'm not so sure what you mean, Noah. I sent you an announcement today through Canvas. So the reason that I use it is because I think it's a good announcement system for the students, and I think it makes it easy for you to find in one space the syllabus, instructions on assignments, and things like that. So that's why I use Canvas. I don't know who told you I don't, but anyway, nice question. So let's go over these fallacies. First of all, the general definition of a fallacy. What is it? So a fallacy is when an argument has a logical flaw or error, which means that it doesn't, premises don't provide the proper support to the conclusion. So that's just the general concept of a fallacy. When an argument contains a logical flaw or an error. And arguments can be invalid or erroneous in various ways. So we need to identify the specific cases of fallacies that there have been. And then Paul, you say in the other advanced features of the platform. So this thing about Canvas, I mean, if you have a specific point that you're making, like you like Canvas or you like something about Canvas, maybe you could tell me what it is that you think you're missing. Kayla, I'm sorry my laptop wasn't working and I'm using my phone. Can someone type the definition in the chat? Oh, I'll do it. No, not to worry. Alex. Oh, no, because I want you to come and talk to me. I'm forcing you to talk to me. I don't want it to be automatic. I don't want you to just be able to push a button and go somewhere. And there's other reasons too. You want to know? There have been cases where whole entire gradebooks have been wiped out because of glitches in Canvas that deleted all the inputted information. And I've had colleagues in the past that have suffered because they over-relied on Canvas when the data went missing and they didn't have backup. So if I'm already going to keep a bunch of backup files and I want to be in contact with the students, then I'm cutting out the middleman and I'm just dealing with you directly. So, fallacy. Oh, okay, thank you, Paul. You already put it in there. All right, thank you. So, chapter 5, fallacy. I mean, you don't like sending emails to people? You're gonna have to do that in life though. So it's a lesson I'm teaching you. Send emails to people, reach out, contact them. You want your grade? Come get it. That's my thought, that's my belief, okay? So anyway, fallacies. When an argument contains a logical flaw or an error, there are separate categories of fallacies, and we're going to learn 3 different batches of them. We're going to start with the one category called fallacies of ambiguity. That's today's lesson. And then we have fallacies of relevance. That's the next lesson on Thursday. And then coming back next week, we're going to talk about the fallacies of unwarranted assumption. So that's the 3rd category there. And then on Thursday next week, we'll kind of review all of them as much as we can. And if we've been delayed a little bit, then we'll cover the leftover ones at that time. Okay, so fallacies. When an argument contains a logical flaw
or an error. Okay. Okay, yeah, so good. Now, the first category of them, as I say, are fallacies of relevance. Sorry, not relevance. Misspoke, thank you guys. Ambiguity, that's today. Relevance, that's Thursday. Fallacies of ambiguity. Okay. Fallacies of ambiguity. Now, before I list the definition for this, let me take one step back very briefly and just clue you in on the example that the textbook begins with. So as you guys know, a lot of times there are these anecdotes and real life events that are mentioned at the top of these chapters to kind of bring the reader in and give you a sense of the connection between these lessons and reality. So like in chapter 1, they talked about the social psychology experiments of Zimbardo and Milgram. In chapter 3, they talked about the Benghazi scandal and the poor communication that might have led to a shortage of emergency personnel and for evacuated casualties at the embassy. In chapter 4, we talked about these horrifying cases of medical error that resulted in a wrong leg being amputated and stuff, just to show how people can make mistakes in the processing of information, even when they're highly skilled professionals. So in chapter 5, at the beginning of this, they also offer a little bit of an example from real life to kind of illustrate the importance of not being tricked by fallacies or what can happen to people. And they basically talk about the case of Shannon Townsend. Okay, so Shannon Townsend, who was she? She was an honor student in high school, so she was one of the great academic performers in her school. She transferred to, well, she got into the University of Colorado as her college, and in her first semester, she was doing very well in her classes. She was getting a 3.9 GPA, making friends. The problem, though, is at the end of her freshman year, she got involved in a kind of cult movement led by this guy named Jim Roberts, and the cult's called the Brethren. And what they insist is that people who join it cut off all ties with those that are not members, like former family members and friends. And ever since then, she's never been seen again. And although it's just the one example mentioned here, it's not unique to her. Hundreds of young people and adults do similar things each year, being recruited into dangerous cult-type movements that are organized around excessive devotion to a single person or a single set of ideas. And you might wonder, how is it that people find themselves mixed up in these type of movements, even young and smart people like Miss Townsend? Well, as the textbook mentions, a tactic that's common is to use manipulative and deceptive tactics of reasoning, including to deploy fallacious arguments, which, again, can appear to have initial credibility if you're not wise to the way of these fallacious arguments. Any tips? Well, I guess you're going to have to, first of all, position yourself as some type of, I don't know, person with keen insight into something supernatural, or with you know, a message that you're delivering to the world that no one else knows about, and then from there, create an exclusive group that is more and more connected to your teachings and isolated from outside teachings. But I mean, this is not a good thing that anyone should want to do. But anyway, so they prey on young people. What do you think is the most easy prey for a person that's a recruiter of a cult movement? Young, impressionable people that don't ask questions, that are just looking for a place to belong. And, you know, many college students, oftentimes people that are in your general age group, although I know probably have a few exceptions, are struggling with the newfound independence that you have in adult life. You know, you've lived within a household environment, basically under the rule of your parents, which is fine and well, but as you reach maturity and your adult years, you want to branch out and become your own person. And at that point, sometimes people struggle with the newfound freedom and independence that they have, don't know how to use it. Sometimes you're not assertive enough, you depend too much on other people, not tolerant enough of ambiguity, and that can all conspire to lead a person in this type of direction. So anyway, in this chapter, we will be focused on how to recognize fallacious arguments when we see them, so we'll be less vulnerable to any such attempts to control or warp our perspective on things without the use of reason. There's this clinical counselor and cult specialist, Ron Burks, who is quoted in the textbook, and so here's his view about the whole topic. He says, the best way to avoid being targeted by a cult is to be well-informed and unafraid to ask questions. The antidote is critical thinking. Cults don't like people that are constantly thinking and asking questions. So if you're the type of person who doesn't just like smile and say, whoa, I can't believe that's true. That's really interesting. But instead that you have the skeptical standpoint where your first instinct is, I'm not so sure, really, how is that true? What's the proof? How do you know that? Can you show me evidence? These are the type of people who are not so easy for a cult type movement to recruit. And anyway, this is not the sole basis or point of learning these topics, but I'm just relaying to you information I see in the book. So anyway then, let's go from here. The first category, as I say, are fallacies of ambiguity. Now, this is the category name, and underneath this category name, there are 5 members. So just how you could say that mammal is a category of a certain type of animal, like warm-blooded gives live birth, except for the platypus, never mind that. That's a category of a type of animal, and then there are species that fall under that, like lions, tigers, bears, human beings, cats, dogs, okay. So what we're learning first is just a general classification of fallacies of ambiguity, and then we'll talk about 5 individual instances of this. Okay, so what is the overall definition of a fallacy of ambiguity? Well, this is when the argument contains ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between 2 similar concepts. So, okay, so fallacies of ambiguity. And let me just make sure I'm tracking your comments. You guys have a lot to say. Okay, I always want to start a call. I have got you there. Okay. Okay. Okay, example stuck. Good. Improper lazy usage of pronouns. BOG said yes, and I said no, but he was just nice about it. Who was he? Oh yeah, okay. Anyway, we'll get to your examples in due course because there's a lot of material that has to be stated first. I think you're talking about amphibole and so forth, but that has to wait until we talk about equivocation first. Okay, so fallacies of ambiguity. The key common denominator between all the different fallacies of ambiguity is something ambiguous. So what could be ambiguous is the nature of the words involved in the stated argument, or maybe the way that grammar is used, or misplaced pronouns, etc., or an ambiguously used pronoun. Or sometimes it is because there are 2 concepts which are being confused with one another and mixed up in the course of the argument. So we're going to list 5 different members of this category. To Kayla or anyone else above, is this visible? Shall I type it? I'll type it one time. Okay, yeah, no, it's okay. I'm gonna do my best to do both. It takes a moment sometimes when I'm trying to do it fast. I sometimes have a typo and I gotta correct. Okay, there you go, fallacies of ambiguity. When an argument contains ambiguous words, sloppy grammar, or a confusion between 2 similar concepts. So I can clear the board, and now let's go through the list of those that we're going to study on this. So there's 5 fallacies of ambiguity mentioned in the book. First, I'll just provide the names of all 5 so that you have the sense of where we will be going, and then I'll define and explain them one by one. So we're going to talk about these 5 fallacies of ambiguity. Equivocation. So let me make sure that the visual is clear enough. Fallacies of ambiguity, header. And then we have equivocation, that's one of the 5. Then there's amphibole, number 2. Fallacy of accent, number 3. And then the last two, they're kind of very similar in a sense. They just are going in opposite directions. I'll explain that in a moment, but we have fallacy of division and fallacy of composition. Okay, equivocation, amphibole, fallacy of accent, division, composition. So these are the five, and we're starting at the top with equivocation. So my first, thought was, let me just list these for you so you can see what they are, and you'll know how many things we'll be covering. This is our lesson plan. But now we're going to just pay attention to them one by one, starting here. Okay, so I'm going to clear the board so I have some room, but we will get to those other four after this. Okay, so starting off with the equivocation fallacy. So equivocation is a fallacy that happens when there's a key term in an argument which appears multiple times, but the problem is that the meaning of this key term shifts or changes during the course of the argument. Okay? Oh, thanks, Paul. That's great. So equivocation. When a key term appears in an argument more than once, multiple times, so more than once, and with different meanings. So that's the real problem, that last part. It's not bad that the term appears multiple times. The problem is that the meaning of it shifts during the course of the argument, and that means that we equivocate on the meaning of that key term. So, thanks, Paul. You're getting to it very fast. That's nice, because when I'm writing on the board, I will type it if I have to, or if I don't see it appear, but if you're willing to take on that little bit of labor, that's very helpful. Okay, so equivocation, there it is. When a key term in an argument appears more than once, but with different meanings. So I'm going to show you an example of this. The first example I show you is going to be kind of like a toy example, not a real argument that most people would probably make, but it illustrates the concept. And then maybe I'll talk to you about some more interesting real-life cases where this type of fallacy could be committed. Okay, so that's the definition. Now I'll show you some examples. Okay, so let's consider this argument that I'll write on the board here. So I'm listing the numbers of the premises, conclusion to follow below. First premise. Let's say the first premise just claims that Alex is at the bank. Okay, and then continuing from there, a bank, let's say premise 2 states that a bank is a financial institution. So 2 premises, Alex is at the bank. A bank is a financial institution. So just based off of the statements here, what do you think would be the valid conclusion, apparently anyway, of the argument? Just putting those pieces together, therefore, what do we get? Alex is at a bank, and a bank is a financial institution. And so therefore, what follows? Easy enough, I hope. But just see if you can state that conclusion. What results from these 2 statements? What's the inference that you can make? Okay, good. So therefore, Alex is at a financial institution. Perfect. Yes. Okay, now, to understand how this could be a fallacy of equivocation, we have to consider how there could be a word within this argument which is capable of bearing multiple different non-identical meanings. Okay, so like when you guys look up words in the dictionary, and we've talked about this when we talk about language, a single word can have multiple different possible meanings. Sometimes there's a primary meaning, and then you'll see listed after that secondary, tertiary, and additional less common associated meanings with the same word. So like looking up the word school, you might see primary meaning, place where students attend to take lessons for their education, but then you might see some way down the list, school, as in group of fish. Okay, so at any rate then, if you guys don't know, the plural for a bunch of fish together is a school of fish, just like you have a flock of birds. So I hope I didn't lose you with that. But yeah, so again, a single word can have multiple different non-equivalent meanings. So tell me which word within this argument do you think could be the subject of equivocation, meaning that it might be used differently in one place than it is in another. Let's focus on that first, Paul, and then we'll move to the kind of examples that you're giving here. But what word, perhaps, written in this example, could be defined in different ways? That's right, Trevor, the word bank. Okay, so let's consider bank, the word. I'm just drawing these little two directional arrows to show two different meanings of the word. So what's one possible way that the word bank could be interpreted in terms of its meaning? Maybe let's go with the obvious one that is kind of mentioned in the argument. One meaning of bank is what? We've used this word, you've heard it, I'm sure. And sometimes we say bank, we mean what? Meaning what would the word mean? In other words, you know, bank. Financial institution, fair enough. Yeah, I thought you might offer a more fulsome description, you know, lending institution, place where you deposit cash, place where your funds are held for your savings or checking account. Yeah, so that's like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, you know, Chase Bank, banks where you hold your accounts. So one meaning of bank, let's say, is financial institution. The financial bank, like that. Okay, let's call that the sense of the term one. What's a different meaning of the same word, though, bank? Okay, well, Paul, now you're really going over the top. Place where greedy people hang out and smoke cigars by lighting them with $100 bills. Yeah, a lot of rhetoric in there, but that's fair, I guess. Anyway, though, another meaning of the same word, river bank, yeah, edge of a river, possibly. There's also like the food bank, the blood bank, the sperm bank. You know, we could add other possibilities. But since we only need two for this explanation to make sense, I'm just going to go over here with, you know, like the river bank, edge of the river. That's what a bank is in that sense. So let's call that bank second definition of the word. So in the first premise where it says Alex is at the bank, suppose that where he actually is, yeah, there's a bank shot in basketball, there's a snow bank and all that too. Well, anyway, saying Alex is at the bank, let's suppose that what was stated, the information given is actually that he's at the Mississippi River banks hanging out, fishing, doing something. So this is bank in the second sense of the term. But in the second premise, when it says a bank is a financial institution, clearly that implies the first sense of the word, financial bank. But if that's the way that we've used the word in these two premises, does the conclusion follow anymore? Does it logically follow that he's at a financial institution? No, because we've shifted the meaning of bank halfway through the argument. So the conclusion just doesn't logically follow from the premises. At a first glance, though, it may appear as such. Now, obviously, this is not like a very hotly debated conclusion, you know, where people are going to be on two sides. But in life, there can be more realistic and kind of powerful examples of this that have something to do with our experiences. So I'll give you a couple of examples from the book, and then I'll also give you one more that I think adds further depth to the concept. So imagine this is a discussion between two people, Carl and Juan, and these two people don't agree about whether it is a sound medical policy for people to be allowed to request a physician-assisted suicide if they're facing like a terminal illness with no prospect for recovery. If you don't know, actually, in the state of California, we changed the law, I think, in 2016 to approve such procedures for the terminally ill, but it hadn't always been legal. If you know, there used to be a guy named Dr. Jack Kevorkian, popularly sometimes called Dr. Death, and he suffered heavy legal punishments for providing such services to people who had claimed that they were terminally ill. Anyway, setting that aside, Carl and Juan don't agree about the question of whether or not this is a right thing to allow. So let me get to your question in a moment, though, Paul, and let's just finish this example. So Carl says this to his friend Juan. He says, Juan, terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die. They have a right. Juan says, No, they don't. There's no right to that in the US law. There's no right to euthanasia in the US law. Now, these two people look like they're having a legitimate disagreement about whether such a right exists. But in fact, it could be that they're talking past one another because they're understanding a key term in this discussion in different ways. Which word do you believe that I'm highlighting in the example that might be the subject of the misunderstanding or miscommunication or whatever? When Carl says terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die, Juan replies, no, they don't. There's no right to this in the US law. Which word do you think is being used by different definitions in that exchange? Let me see that, and then we'll go from there. Correct, Kayla, the word right. Okay, so let's try and expand upon this example of the book to see what might be going on between Carl and Juan's little debate or disagreement. So when a person talks about rights, what's one possible meaning of that term, right? Like when Carl, for example, says, terminally ill patients have a right to decide how and when they want to die, what do you think he means with his assertion when he uses the word right? What's the understanding of the term that the speaker has in saying that such a right to decide how and when you want to die is there? What must be the meaning of the word in his usage? Because there's different understandings of the same word right on the part of Carl versus Juan. So yeah, Devin, I guess you could say entitlement, like it ought to be allowed. So it's like the concept of a moral right. He's describing it normatively, like in an ideal system, human beings endowed with the free will and choice that we have ought to be permitted the liberty to be given these choices. So he's saying it's morally an obligation to secure these rights. So Carl uses it in the moral sense. But then when Juan fires back and says, no, there's no such right in the US law, what is his usage referring to? Not the moral concept of it ought to be there, but rather, what do you think his reference means? There is no right to that in the US law. Canonized. Okay, that's one very, I think, good way to put it. Also, you, Preston, legal rights. Okay, good. So that's like what has already been established in law under the rules that we've adopted in our legal system. In the same way you can imagine people before slavery was abolished. On the one hand, a person says, you know, a human being has a right to not be held in bondage and servitude. That's just a right that human beings have. And then, you know, before slavery's been abolished, before the Civil War, maybe their dialectical opponent says, no, there's no right that human beings have to be free of slavery in the US law or something like that, right? So the person is saying that it's not yet recognized in the law. The other person says it ought to be. And so in a way, they're not talking about the same concept with their same word of the word right. Before women were given the right to vote in 1920 in the United States, you could have said the same thing. Women have a right to vote. And then another person could have said, no, there's no right to it right now in the US law. So sometimes rights are spoken of in terms of what ought to be applied to the law from some moral sensibility. And then another case could be talked about having rights, just what's already been established in the canon of law. Okay, good. Let me give you another example that's also from the book. So I'm trying to just cover all the bases. So the book takes this quote from reporting back in 2010. On February 23rd, 2010, Fox News reported that Democratic Senator Harry Reid said, so if you, little recent history, Harry Reid was the majority leader of the Senate until I think 2014 when Republicans took control of the United States Senate. Of course, now Democrats are in control again by a razor-thin margin. But anyway, Harry Reid had this quote where he said, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. Now from this, the Fox News reporting team took his quote and drew this conclusion, that Reid thinks it is okay for men that are out of work to beat their wives. So which word do you think in Reid's original statement is the subject of different interpretations? When he said, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. And then Fox goes off and says, that's terrible. How can this man say that it is okay for poor people to beat their wives? That's just wrong. Which word do you think might be the subject matter of this apparent misunderstanding of the statement? Let me ask you that. Not beat, Kayla, no, because beat's actually only used once well, never mind, that's not the issue, actually. The issue is rather the way that the word that's the subject of the disagreement or misinterpretation is used by the second person who speaks. May. I'm not sure if I read you right, Preston, but maybe there's just a typo. The word may is what we're thinking of, correct, Evan? So let me ask you guys one more time. The original statement was, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife. Very good, Devin, you're already on top of it. So may, the one word may can have at least two meanings. So sometimes when we say that something may happen, we're just talking about the possibility of it happening. So it could happen, it's possible, it may happen. That's possibility. But sometimes the same word may is used in reference to what you're granting permission for people to do. Like, you may have a cookie, like I'm giving you permission to take one of mine or something like that. That's granting permission, but that's not the same thing as saying it's possible. Okay, so permission. For example, suppose that I am looking at the weather forecast and I see that it says there's a 70% chance of rain in the forecast tomorrow. I could very well say after that, it may rain tomorrow. It may, because it's possible. I'm not saying I'm giving permission. It's okay for the rain to happen. I'm allowing it. That would not be reasonable or coherent to say such a thing. But that is one meaning of the word may. You sometimes hear this used for humorous effect. The word can is another kind of example of this. Can, sometimes we say what we're able to do, what we're capable of doing. And in other cases, we use it to refer to what we are being allowed to do. Like, so have you ever heard someone say, can I go to the bathroom? And then like some wise guy is like, I don't know, can you? Like they're taking the term and they're saying, because you didn't disambiguate the meaning, it's possible for me to interpret you asking me, am I able to use the bathroom? Is that possible? But of course, the question is being asked from the standpoint of permission from whoever is going to authorize them to leave the room, like a teacher or somebody. Okay, so once again, and that's what the book's saying, it says, from this, the Fox reporters drew the conclusion that Reed thinks it is okay for men who are out of work to beat their wives. He said, if you're a man and you're out of work, you may beat up your wife, like I'm authorizing it. In doing so, they committed the fallacy of equivocation, since the term may has more than one meaning. It can be used to mean permission, or it can be used to express possibility. In fact, Reed actually said, men who are out of work tend to be abusive. So he was not giving unemployed men permission to beat their wives, nor was he condoning abuse. He was just citing a sociological statistic that if you look at the rate of domestic violence, it's greater in terms of statistical incidence as you go down the socioeconomic scale to the poor. So he was just saying that becomes likelier as people become poorer, not that, as I see it, that's okay. All right. Sometimes we use words that are relative terms, and we commit the fallacy of equivocation because we use them in different senses. The book gives this example. 2-year-old Katie is very tall. Her father, on the other hand, is not tall, but he's just average in height. So therefore, Katie is taller than her father? Does that really follow? No. I mean, we did say Katie's tall and her father isn't. So do you see why the conclusion does not really follow, though? The problem with the conclusion is that it's using the word tall in two senses. When we say of Katie, the 2-year-old, that she's tall, we mean tall for a 2-year-old toddler. When we say the adult father is not tall, we mean not tall with respect to the average height of an adult male, which I think is like 5'10" or 11. So we can have it both ways. She's tall, he's not, but he's still taller than her, because tall, when it's referred to the case of adult men, takes a different standard as its norm than tall when used in discussions of children. Okay, now I'll just put one more of these up here because I thought it was interesting. Sometimes when I'm over at Cal State Fullerton teaching, I've had this class been assigned to me a couple times, Philosophy of Love and Sex. That's an interesting class. We talk all about the historical literature on the topic of love, romance, and then more modern essays and material on the concepts of consent, sexual deviance, and all kinds of weird stuff. But anyway, one thing that we talked about at one point in that course is moral arguments about sexual consent, and when is sexual consent valid and when is it invalid, which is obviously a hot topic today in the midst of the Me Too era and all of that. So consider an argument like this, which could be equivocal, which could be an equivocation fallacy in the context of sexual consent. So let's say premise 1. If a person consents, if an adult consents to a sexual act, then it is permissible to proceed. Okay, that just says that if you're involved with an adult and they give consent to such an act, then that makes it legal and permissible to engage in that way. The second premise, though, imagine, says this: by not physically resisting me, she gave consent. I'll add something. Resisting me or fighting, maybe that just makes it a little more obvious what's being discussed. By not physically resisting me or fighting, she gave consent. And so therefore, it was permissible to have sex with her. Okay, now, if you look at that argument, maybe you can spot the possible item that could lead to the equivocation fallacy here. Which key term, all-important term in this big argument, has been used more than once, and we can maybe see it being used differently in various parts of the argument? Which word do you think I'm pointing us to here? Consent, that's right, Trevor, yes. So I don't think I'll have to create a big note on the board for us to talk about this because it's a subject matter of a lot of social context and discussion. But when we talk about consent, as we do in premise one, what kind of consent, what kind of definition of consent does make it legally and otherwise appropriate to proceed with a sexual act? Like, what kind of consent constitutes real permission to go forward? What do you think? Something that you should know, because you don't want to be held liable or anything, or if you're on the other side of the equation, you don't want people to have the wrong idea about what constitutes consent. So you say, Devin, just a single word, yes. You could have maybe stated it more fulsomely, but basically like avowing explicitly through a verbal act, some token of consent is put forward, like I agree to this, or you're the initiator of it, right? And it becomes clear by context that that's what you want to do. So you have to show through some overt sign. It's got to be communicated, either verbally or in other words, in some other explicit way. But in the second premise, the notion of consent here becomes much weaker. This is like robust, affirmative, stated consent. That does make it permissible. But in the second premise, the person changes the definition of consent to just failure to produce bruises on me or to fight me off or to thrash around and kind of try to push me off of them. So physical submission is being described as consent here, but explicit verbal authorization is consent in this case. So we've taken consent from, you telling the person it's okay to just refusing to show some kind of physical resistance. And that does not mean then that consent was used the same way throughout, so the conclusion doesn't follow. And there are all kinds of reasons why, yes, it works, I suppose, as a response to the question referring to consent. Yes, that's right. Yes, the word yes, if you'd put it in quotes, I guess I would have understood it better, but I see what you mean, right? Now, in real life, obviously, sometimes people make this horrible type of argument. They're like, well, she didn't, she didn't say no, she didn't fight. Well, sometimes suppose the person's incapacitated, so that could have been the reason that they didn't resist or fight back. In other cases, the person may be under fear or threat, and they may feel that if they do resist in a serious way, that they may be further injured, harmed, or even killed by the person that's, the attacker. So there are various reasons why this is not valid consent, but this is. But by changing the definition halfway through, we reach the misleading conclusion that appears to follow from the premises above. Certificate of consent, if you will, is another possibility. You say signature. That's a bit awkward, but there are such apps, I guess, now. I don't know how much legal force they carry, but certainly it wouldn't be okay if you could press the button under duress or something, or under coercion. But yeah, I think you guys all understand the concept being discussed here. Okay, so anyway, guys, just an example of an equivocation argument. So make sure that key terms within major arguments or small arguments are used in a standardized, uniform way throughout. We cannot equivocate or switch up the meaning of a word within the context of an argument. Otherwise, the argument goes off the rails, and whatever conclusion is based on the given premises just doesn't follow through. Okay, so that's equivocation. Sorry. Okay, guys, so we've done one of them. Next, it's the fallacy of amphiboly. So the amphiboly fallacy. This is a fallacy that happens when an argument contains a grammatical error or ambiguity, which allows for more than one conclusion to be drawn. Okay, so when there is a grammatical mistake when there is a grammatical mistake in an argument which allows more than one conclusion to be drawn. Okay, so main point within this definition is that kind of grammatical mistake or ambiguity in the argument. Okay, so sometimes we use grammar in a way that doesn't disambiguate what we've actually said or what we intended. One easy example of this can be with the use of pronouns, where the referent of the pronoun is ambiguous because it could apply to multiple different individuals. Suppose that I told you that Steve and John were hanging out and having a nice chat at his house. Now, why is that an ambiguously worded statement? What's grammatically ambiguous in that statement? I just say Alex and Steve are hanging out at his house. What's the ambiguity? What is it that you're not sure what refers to what? If you can explain that maybe, then I can go further from there. No, it's not hanging out, Preston, although I can understand you might think that that's just a vaguely specified word. Maybe I'll change the example. John and Alex are talking about his girlfriend. Or, yeah, there you go, Prue. Whose house? So the pronoun his is used to refer to the house, his house. But there are two male subjects that have been named. I think I said Alex and John or whatever, right? So the word his is ambiguously referring to one of the two male subjects, but without further disambiguation, we're just left shrugging our shoulders. Whose house? You understand? Exactly. So if it was John and Bill talking about his girlfriend, you don't know whose girlfriend is the subject matter of the statement because his is grammatically ambiguous in terms of which referent it takes. If I say to you that the, let's see, the anthropologist spent a lot of time with the malnourished indigenous natives, and he took a lot of pictures of these malnourished natives, but they were underdeveloped. What do you think? He took a lot of pictures of the malnourished natives, but they were underdeveloped. What do you think could be the grammatical ambiguity there? Devin, thank you for your question. But one thing I have to do a little bit in some parts of this chapter is to deviate from the strictness with which we insist on standard form, because many of the examples provided in the book are themselves pieces of dialogue, conversational exchanges. If I give you a quiz or something, I'll try my best to present most of the examples in standard form, but just in keeping with the informal way that these fallacies are discussed in the book, we are allowing ourselves to depart somewhat from the convention of a strict standard form argument. So, but it's a good question. Oh, and thanks, Paul, for the typed definition. Amphiboly, when there's a grammatical mistake in an argument which allows more than one conclusion to be drawn. But still, I haven't received my answer to that last example. Let me say it again. Maybe I didn't say it so clearly. The researcher took photos of the malnourished natives, but they were underdeveloped. What do you think could be the reference that I'm making to a grammatically ambiguous term in there? He took pictures of these natives, but they were underdeveloped. Let me know. Yeah, what is underdeveloped? So in this case, it is the plural pronoun they. We're not sure whether they refers to the set of photographs that were not properly developed in the darkroom, or if it is the subjects being pictured in the photographs that are the subject of the plural pronoun they. And without further disambiguation, we just don't know. Underdeveloped is in one sense a reference to photos that have not been fully finished. In another case, it could mean somebody who's malnourished and therefore not physically developing. Okay, very good. So you understood the example. Here's some other stuff that's in the book along the same lines. So the first example they give is this statement. Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle over her life. Okay, so let me brief sidebar to talk about the context here. Back in early 2000s, when the governor of Florida was Jeb Bush, the brother of former President George W. Bush, there was a woman named Terry Schiavo that went through a traumatic head injury due to a automobile accident, I believe. And because of that, she had to be placed on a feeding tube and on life support machines. And basically what the doctors were telling the family and her husband was that as sad as it is, she had no prospects for any type of recovery, that she had total vegetative coma, and the only reason she's being preserved is because of these extraordinary life support systems, but that she had no possible chance to ever revive consciousness or to become, an able-bodied functioning person again. So a debate arose within the family and from her husband also about whether or not to so-called pull the plug, because she hadn't given no advance directive before to state what her will would have been in case this happened. Some of us have done that. You can specify in an advance directive that in the event of me becoming permanently comatose, I would request that life support systems be terminated, or that all measures be taken to support my life. And so in the absence of such a statement, it becomes a matter of debate as to what the person's wishes might have been. And so that was the case. There were different parties within her family that didn't agree as to what she might have wanted. And here's what the statement says, that I could read it again. It says, Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of the battle over her life. Now tell me, what do you think is the ambiguous part of that phrase or statement? It says Schiavo's mother and her husband don't agree on this. So can you tell me what's ambiguous grammatically? Just giving you a moment. Yeah, whose husband? That's right. It says Schiavo's mother and her husband. But I'll read again, Noah. Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband are on opposite sides of whether to pull the plug. When it says her, we just don't know which female subject attaches to the female pronoun, because if it is Schiavo, then what is being said is that Terry Schiavo's mother and Schiavo's husband don't agree. But another possible interpretation is that it is the parents of Schiavo that don't agree between themselves. Terry Schiavo's mother and her husband, her meaning the mother of Schiavo's husband. So in the end, unless we ask another question, we wouldn't know. But the truth is, and let me read it, it says, in this statement regarding the issue of whether to remove the feeding tube from brain-damaged Schiavo, the ambiguous wording makes it unclear which conclusion follows. Is it Schiavo's husband or the father, the mother's husband, that is taking the opposite side? In this case, it was Schiavo's husband that did not agree with both the mother and father of Schiavo. The husband believed that the feeding tube should be removed, but the parents thought that she had some miraculous chance of regaining consciousness and insisted that the feeding tube be kept in place. And that's not even the end of the whole saga of Terry Schiavo. It became a big national news story because Governor Jeb Bush made an extraordinary intervention into the case, siding with the parents of Schiavo to extend all available life support measures, even though it wasn't clear to the family and the husband, at least, that's what she would have wanted. And eventually, she passed away anyway because they couldn't support her forever. So that's just another case of an amphibole fallacy. Two more examples from the book. I'll just read them because they're in there. Sometimes we see grammatical ambiguity in advertising and marketing materials that can sometimes trick us or make us think differently about what's really being said in the advertisement. One example in the book is from the fragrance company Clinique. They created a new aroma called Happy, and the tagline in the advertising materials was like, wear it and be happy. But with respect to the word and here, we're not sure what grammatical role it plays. Is it being used to express a conjunction of two unrelated facts, like wear it and separate from that, you'll be happy, but the two things are not connected? Or is it talking about a conditional, like wear it and then because you wore it, you will become happy? Now, obviously, the advertiser is hoping that you'll draw on the second association because that would give you a motive to buy the product. I want to be happy, so I'm going to buy this fragrance. But of course, if someone sued them for false advertising saying, I bought your fragrance and I had one of the worst years of my life, not happy at all, then they could easily say, well, come on, I mean, it's a bit ambiguous. I know one way to read it is that it says it'll cause your happiness, but if you say the word and, it can also just mean happiness will be a separate result. Devin, would a good example be, I'm going to the movies with John and Steve, afterwards we'll go to his house? Yes, that would be a very good example because as you can see, whose house? The word his is used, but when there's a variety of possible subjects to whom the pronoun may attach, we've been left with no clarity as to which house it is. And so if your parent was being told this, that might be a tricky way for the child to get around the parent doesn't want him to be at John's house, so they just say his and name another person, so they might think they're going to Steve's. But the clever parent would say, can you please be clearer? Or you say his, which one? Very good example, yeah. And one more from the book, just to kind of finalize this. They also talk about how sometimes it can be used for humorous effect. In the 1990s, there was a movie called Spy Hard, like a really gonzo comedy, like spoof kind of movie. Anyway, here's one of the dialogue scenes. The agent is talking to the director, and the agent says, sir, we've intercepted a very disturbing satellite transmission from our listening post on the Rock of Gibraltar. And the director says, what is it? Agent says, oh, what is it? Oh, it's this big rock that sticks out of the water off the south coast of Spain. Now, when the agent said that we've intercepted a disturbing transmission from the post on the Rock of Gibraltar, the director's question, what is it? I mean, I guess you can say the reference of the definite article, it, could in one case pertain to the message that has been intercepted from the Rock of Gibraltar, like the content of the message, or the question, what is it, could be in reference to the other part of the statement, which is, what is this, the Rock of Gibraltar? Now, for humorous effect, the agent misunderstands him and gives him the explanation of what the Rock of Gibraltar is. But obviously, the question was directed at the content of the message. And so, yeah, you see Abbott and Costello and a whole bunch of kind of humorous uses of grammatical ambiguity for the effect of comedy. But in real life, obviously, we want to be clear and we want to communicate well. So if you don't know what another person has said and there is grammatical ambiguity, just ask the person to rephrase the statement if necessary, and try your best to avoid using language and grammar in an improper or an ambiguous way. Okay, so then we go on to the next. We said about equivocation and amphibole now. The next one in the list is what's called the fallacy of accent. Okay, fallacy of accent. Okay, so the fallacy of accent happens when the meaning of an argument or statement changes depending on which word within the which word or phrase within it is being emphasized. So okay, so when the meaning of an argument or statement changes, depending on which word or phrase within it is emphasized. Okay, so one interesting and common feature of our language is how we can add a stress or an emphasis, an inflection on certain words or phrases to kind of change the tenor of the statement or argument that we're making. Thanks again, Paul. Thank you. So for example, when you see a word that's bolded in type or italicized in type, that sometimes adds to the way that it would be read differently. Like you linger on that word a little bit longer, or you emphasize and add stress to that word. But simply by doing that, we can sometimes transform the meaning of a sentence or a claim or an argument. Take the case here. This is in the book. So one example of the book. So imagine this exchange happening between the mother and the delinquent daughter. Mother says, okay, so she comes home, mom comes home, and what she sees is something terrible. She sees that the, whatever, like garden shed out in the backyard has been burned down to the ground and it's just a pile of ashes now. So that's not good. And what she sees is her daughter is the reason for it. Like her daughter's covered in some ash and soot and, you know, there's like embers burning and the daughter's like kind of over there. So she goes to her little daughter and she says, what the hell? What are you doing? You burned down the shed? Really? I mean, didn't I tell you don't play with matches? And then let's imagine this is the daughter's response coming back. Oh yeah, I know, Mom, but that's the thing. I wasn't playing with matches. I mean, to me, this is like I'm just learning about how fire works. This is science. There's no game. I mean, I'm not playing. So I didn't break the rule. You say don't play with matches, so I just came out here and started to, in a very serious and sober way, conduct experiments with fire. Now, tell me what's wrong, or what is the basis for the misunderstanding on the behalf of the young daughter? She's added emphasis to a given word in the statement that was originally presented by the mother, and by accenting or stressing on this one word, it changes completely the message that was delivered. So which word has been emphasized by our delinquent daughter here? Did you follow that? Let me know. One last time, I'll say it again. Mother comes back, sees the shed's burned down. What are you doing? I told you. Why did you do this? I told you don't ever play with matches. Didn't I say that? Daughter says, I wasn't playing with matches. You know, I was just stone-faced, 1,000-yard stare, setting things on fire. Okay, so the word play, correct, Kayla. Wasn't playing with matches per se. So when the daughter has changed that emphasis and added it to the word playing, it's like here's what she is trying to misinterpret the statement to mean. You can do whatever you want with matches as long as it doesn't amount to like a funny little game or whatever. As long as it's not like some kind of fun and games, please feel free to use the matches. But obviously, what do you think the mother's original statement actually meant? Just use common sense. If somebody tells you don't play with matches, what does that literally mean in real life? You know, what is the basic understanding of that you're supposed to take from the mother's statement? No, it's in the tone. Prue, come on. Didn't I like go off like trying to be like, I'm not playing with, I like playing. I'm trying to emphasize it out of like totally off the top. Yeah, so I guess, Paul, you're putting it in a very blunt way. I would say it this way, though, because in your statement, it's a little bit even too expansive. It's like, just don't use matches in any way. Don't use them. No, not the case either. The parent's not saying you're okay to use matches as long as you don't mess with them in a way that could burn something down. They're saying don't play with fire, don't use matches, don't ever touch them. You're too young to even light them. Okay, so when the child's like, I wasn't playing with the matches, they change the meaning of don't touch them in any way to just don't do anything that amounts to playing. As long as you're not playing, it's okay and fair game. So clearly, you understand that that's a misinterpretation that's elicited by the accent that's been emphasized in the case. Yeah, I'm never mad, Noah. But if you're mad at yourself, I'm sorry. It's okay. No one's mad at you. Okay, so that's one example. Here's another one. It's also from the book. School newspaper said they're going to crack down on off-campus drinking. Sweet. I'm glad to hear that I can drink on campus now. So the student reads in the newspaper that there's going to be additional rules against off-campus drinking. But they read it and they're like, oh, nice, they're having a problem with off-campus drinking. Sweet, so I can bring a flask to class now. Obviously, the statement didn't mean we're cracking down on off-campus drinking, so it's fair now to drink on campus. It means in addition to our existing rules that prohibit drinking on campus, we also want to try and limit people drinking at school events and other things of that kind. So by adding the inflection on off-campus, the person almost intentionally misinterprets the original meaning of the statement. So it was okay to play with matches. Okay, well, Paul, it's a special case. I just, I have the material I'm working with. How about this? I'll throw a few more out there to kind of get all the bases covered. Yeah, please, don't play with fire, Paul. But anyway, that's okay. So here's another case. Suppose you have parents and they see their kid hanging out with someone, and it's like that classic case of, I don't want you to hang out with that person. That person's a bad influence on you. You guys shouldn't be friends. So they say to the child, look, I'm your mom, I'm your dad, whoever, and here's the rules. You hung out with that person, I don't like him. You spend some time, I saw him in your room. From now on, I don't ever want to see that person come through this door again. I don't ever want to see them come through this front door again. You understand me? Understood. So parent comes back the next few days, and sees this child of theirs hanging out with the friend that they prohibited once again. And it's like, can you come over here? Child comes over. It's like, what? It's like, what are you doing with this person here? I told you so clearly, I don't ever want them to come through the door again. Now, what do you think is going to be the response of our child here if it's going to be an example of our accent fallacy? Following the example, tell me. Parent says, I don't ever want them coming through this door again. You heard me? Message delivered. Kid hangs out with them and they're in the house again later. So what is the child's response to the parent who says, what are you doing with them in here? They're like, I know, but what you said was don't ever let them come through the door again. So I let them in through the window. That's fair, right? I mean, your rules, you say don't let them in the door. So now they're coming in through the window. But obviously, what was the message implied by the original prohibition? It wasn't let them in through any opening of the house, but I just don't like it when they walk through the door specifically. The door thing bugs me. Obviously, when someone says that, it's just like a catch-all phrase for don't allow them into the house. And yet again, through the use of accent, the meaning has been shifted and changed. Okay, and as the book says it, in the first example, the delinquent daughter changes the meaning of her mother's warning by placing an emphasis on the word playing. In the second, by emphasizing the term off campus, the student erroneously concludes that the college administration only opposes drinking when it is off campus. Devin, would a good example be don't steal things from Costco, and so the person steals from Sam's Club instead? Yeah, like I guess that could make sense, but I'd have to, maybe we can more fully state the context. But yeah, like if a parent says to their child, they see him trying to pocket something while they're shopping at Costco, they're like, don't ever do that, don't steal from Costco. And then the next time they're out at like, Sam's Club, they're doing it again. Like, what did you do? And they said, well, you said don't steal from Costco. Now we're in Sam's Club, new ball game. Obviously, that would be another good example. Fair enough. So let me make one more point about this general idea of being able to change the tenor of a statement by means of these accents or stresses in speech. Even one and the same sentence can completely have a different color or tone depending on which word or phrase within it is accented. And here's an example. Suppose I just say in a flat monotone, like a question, why did you steal my bike from me? That contains information and you understand what it says. But imagine if I say it with a more expressive tone and I'm trying to now emphasize given words in the statement. Why did you steal my bike from me? Now I'm adding all the emphasis to bike, and that sort of gives off the message that of all things that you could have stolen, really my bike, my precious bike, why'd you steal my bike? Like I would have thought you might have stolen, something random that I didn't care so much about. Or if I say it this way, why did you steal my bike from me? In that case, all emphasis is added to the word steal. And it's like, why did you steal it? You could have borrowed it, or you could have just had a loan, or you could have, just used it for a couple days. Why did you steal my bike from me? Or how about, why did you steal my bike from me? In that case, it's like the emphasis is added to the word me. Like, I know you're a thief and that you steal, but from me, really? I would have thought you would have stolen from other people. Why did you steal my bike from me, though? So understanding the way that language can serve these purposes, sometimes it is for effect and sometimes it, has its own rhetorical value. But when we're just concerned strictly about accurate information and exchange of arguments and claims, then we should try our best to say things in a way that doesn't confuse or they can't be misinterpreted. And if someone misinterprets us, then we should point out that that's an accent fallacy. Okay, so very good. Well, come on, you've got a nice pun there. The fallacy with the sort of PH spelling of the word phallus, a completely different word. That's not even equivocation, though. It's just what they call, what's the word? Phonemic. The phonological sequence of the two terms sounds similar because phallus is the beginning of it. But other than that, there's no connection. Okay, so good on the fallacy of accent, everyone. Well, actually, just kidding. One more thing I'm going to say, because it's also in the book. And this is, I think, a little bit more of a sort of heavy example of this. They talk about that concept of how cults can sometimes recruit, naive subjects to their ranks. And one tactic that sometimes is effective for cult recruiters is to lean heavily on the person's already existing religious views, if they have some. And that's what the Jim Roberts Brethren cult did do. So knowing that a lot of people in our society are just Christian already, they would try and use that to build a bridge into the cult. So they would say, look, you've read the Bible, you're a Christian. So haven't you read Luke 14:33? It says right there. So likewise, whosoever of you that forsaketh not all that he hath cannot be my disciple. Now, why do you think it says, unless you give up everything, you can't be my disciple? He's talking about the brethren. He's saying you got to give up your friends. You've got to give up, your social life to become part of this. And so that says it in the Bible. If you follow the Bible, you should join our cult. Or they could proof text. The terminology for this is proof texting. When you take out of context a piece of scripture to use it for your own purposes. You could say it says in the Bible, be thy brother's keeper. Be thy brother's keeper. Who do you think's the brothers? We're the brethren. This is talking about us. Keep to us. Or they could say, et cetera, these kind of things. So you sometimes have to be careful when people take statements out of context or they use emphasis or accenting to kind of shape your view about it in a way that might be inaccurate. Okay, so good all around. In Waco was an expert in quoting Bible verses, yes, and that's another good example. So it's a common tactic, and it's just mentioned in the book. As I read it here, the fallacy of accent can happen when we take a passage out of context, thus changing its original meaning. For example, proof texting involves taking a scriptural passage out of the original context in order to prove a particular point. Cults will sometimes use proof texting to support their arguments. The following passage from the King James Bible mentioned at the beginning to convince recruits that they must forsake not only their worldly possessions, but also their family, friends, education, and career plans. But the quoted passage ignores the fact that neither Jesus nor his disciples forsook or completely disowned their family or friends, so the cult leader is committing the fallacy of accent. Okay, so if you're not sure about which term is being emphasized or accented within an argument, ask the person who made the statement or argument to repeat or explain what they meant so that there's no possibility for this miscommunication happening. Okay, so then there's these last two. There's fallacy of division and fallacy of composition. Okay, so the fallacy of division, this happens when a characteristic of an entire group is erroneously assumed to be a characteristic of each member of the group. Okay. Okay, so when a characteristic of a whole group is incorrectly assumed to be a characteristic of each member of the same group. And let me go ahead and, unless, Paul, are you already typing that? I don't want to be redundant to type it twice, but I'm happy to put it in there. You'll give me your answer in a moment, and if I see you say no, then I'll put it in there. If you type it, then I'll obviously see that. Okay, so fallacy of division, everyone. When a characteristic of a whole group is erroneously incorrectly assumed to be a characteristic of each individual member of that group. Now, there's a sort of logical frame or form for the division fallacy. Thanks again, Paul. And here's how it would sort of look in structure. Okay. Don't want this to kind of confuse you, so I'm going to create a partition. Okay, so let me write out this argument here. Here's the form of the division fallacy. It goes as follows. Group G, that's too small, it's not even the letter G, thank you. Group G has characteristic C. That's the first premise. Second premise says that some individual X, just as a placeholder because this could span across any number of cases, but X is a member of group G. X is a member of G. So the erroneous conclusion to draw would be that the individual X has that same characteristic that the whole group has. X has characteristic C. Okay, so okay, so just putting in the chat one time the form of argument that I've kind of written over here in this space. So that's the way that division fallacy looks. It says to start that there's a group which has a given characteristic, and then one individual member of the group is pointed out, and then the claim is that that individual will have the same feature seen as in the whole group, but not necessarily true. So let me give you some random examples of this, okay? And here's one from the book to start. Okay, men, just as a group, are taller than women. If you're just looking at average heights, so like the average male height is taller than the average female height. So men have the characteristic taller than women. Well, so Devin, let's use the terminology properly. If it was deductive, then it would be valid. Yes, but the problem is, just formally speaking, it can appear valid on a first pass. The problem, though, is that the assumptions contained within the premises don't carry through to this conclusion when the individual members of the group don't have the same feature that the whole group does have. So, I mean, in a way, just looking at it without further information provided, it has the form of a valid argument, yes. But it's problematic when we start filling things in for G and X and C in a way that shows that it's not a correct conclusion. So like, for example here, and this is in the book, I was just saying, men are taller than women. So let the first premise be men as a group have the characteristic taller than women. Now, Danny DeVito is a member of the group men. Danny DeVito is a man, in other words. If you don't know who Danny DeVito is, I mean, this is the example used in the book, but he's a well-known Hollywood actor, comedian. He still, I think, appears in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, long-running comedy sitcom. And he had some movies, a lot of movies back in the 80s, 90s. Twins with Arnold Schwarzenegger, kind of well-known back then. Anyway, though, so the argument here is that men are taller than women. DeVito is a man, and therefore DeVito is taller than the average woman. But he's very short. I think he's 4'10" or something. And so in that case, we reached the wrong conclusion. Taxi, another good example. Yeah, so just because men overall are taller than women doesn't mean that one arbitrarily selected member of the group has the feature that the group as a whole has. Here's another example. The United States is the wealthiest country in the world. That's a fact. And you, let's say, are a citizen of the United States. So you're one member of the country. So therefore, you are one of the wealthiest people in the world. Obviously, that's not true. You can be a member of a system which has immense wealth without necessarily each individual portion or member within the system having that same kind of wealth. It's like saying we have the most powerful military and you're a member of this country, so you have the most powerful arsenal, but that's not necessarily true either. Okay? Yes, I think, Devin, the right way to look at it is that the association between the group characteristic and the individual who's a member of the group doesn't hold, because this characteristic is in many cases something that can only be properly ascribed to the group overall. I don't know. Suppose that there was a sports team that you thought was the best team in the game. Like, I don't know, could it be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers right now for football? I mean, it's mostly Tom Brady, but say you believe that, or I don't know, go with the Lakers. I know they're number 4 right now, though, in the Western Conference, but they are the champions too. Look, whatever example you want to use, let's just take a team sport. Suppose that you believe that the Lakers are the best team in basketball, and then you name a player. That's not necessarily true either. You can have the best team, but that doesn't mean that every single member of the team is like an elite player, or in relative terms to the other members of the league, one of the best players. Devin, you say, I would think of all John's friends like basketball, and he would as well. That's good, yeah. I mean, as an example, here, let me give you one that's kind of similar to yours. Suppose that your family is just a really loud family. When they get together, everyone's like, laughing, calling out and all that stuff. So it's like a big, boisterous family occasion. My family is loud. I'm a member of that family, so I'm loud. That's not necessarily true. So you can be a part of a whole which has features that are not seen in every individual member of it. Okay? The hotel is big. Room 101 is a room of the hotel. Does that mean that the room is big? No, you can have a big hotel with a lot of small parts. And so in some cases, there are features of the whole that don't derive down to each individual part. They call it division because it starts from the group and it divides down to the individual members of the group. But where we commit the fallacy is this, assumption that's made that whenever a group has a quality, every individual point within it has the same. Mateo, so must the group characteristic be defined as an average of the individual's characteristics? Well, the group, in a way, is its own metaphysical entity. A team is not the same thing as an individual player on a team. A nation is not the same thing as an individual citizen within the nation. So have you ever heard the phrase that sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of its parts? That is often true. You can have a family that as a general matter is loud or quiet, but that does not necessarily filter down to every member of the family that's a part. So division fallacy happens when we overlook these points and we conclude in these ways from the evidence of those kind of premises. Sometimes stereotype type fallacies can be seen within the division case. I don't want to repeat any negative cultural stereotypes because those are certainly not nice, but sometimes there are positive ones, and one of those is given in the book. So I guess Canadians have a wide reputation for being very friendly, just friendly people, nice, willing to help, stranger in need. So anyway, if that's the cultural reputation of Canadians, here's an argument the book gives. Canadians are really nice. Derek is a Canadian, so he's really nice. But obviously you can have a culture which in general has a certain reputation or stereotypical characteristic trait. That does not necessarily mean that every member that's identifiable within that category has the same feature. That would be, again, a case of the division fallacy. Okay, so anyway then, we got through division. There is one more, but I'm going to have to hold you in suspense for that to talk about it at the beginning on Thursday because I wanted to spend a good amount of time just talking about the concept of fallacies in general. But we'll make pretty short work of the last one. The composition fallacy, just as a preview, is really just the flip side of division. It just is similar, but in the opposite direction. So with composition, we say X is a member of group G. X has characteristic C. So therefore, the whole group has that characteristic. And that's not necessarily true, right? So like Colin Kaepernick takes a knee. He's a member of the 49ers. So the 49ers take a knee. Not necessarily true. You can have one member of the group that does have a feature that is not seen in the whole group of which they are a part. I don't know. The atoms in my body are not visible to the naked eye. Therefore, I am not visible to the naked eye. That's clearly not true, right? The individual parts, you need a microscope or a magnification device to see them. But I am the sum aggregate total of all those little atoms put together into a big macroscopic physical object, this life form and organism that I am. So even though each part of me, each particle is not visible without a magnifying glass, well, I shouldn't even say that, without a microscope, thank you. That of course doesn't mean that me, the sum total of all of them, can't be seen without magnification. You can see me right now, as you can clearly tell. So more to say on that, but just a little last word. So then guys, I think that's cool for today's Tuesday meeting. Let me know if everything's all right here in the chat, and if so, I'll close it out, and I'll see you guys back on Thursday. And again, as I've said, I'll be answering all emails requesting grades today, tomorrow, and Thursday. So once you put in your request, you're in line, and you'll certainly be hearing back from me within a couple days at the most. So are we good? Let's see your closing thoughts here. Good to go, everyone? Only you know this. Only you can tell me, so I have to wait for you. What shall I infer? You're like, no, actually, I just want to keep hanging out. Just keep watching this lecture forever. It doesn't ever have to end. It does, though. I'm sorry to say that. But come on, guys, give me my feedback. Or is there a problem with the chat? Is that the issue? Are you unable to utilize the chat? Well, I mean, it's still filming. I'm still watching it on my phone. Maybe there's just been some lag in the ability for your comments to be received in the chat. Okay, well, thanks, Preston, for giving me that feedback. To the rest of you, say goodbye, and then I'm going to close the chat. Okay. Thank you also, Trevor, and to all the rest. Have a good one then, guys, and I'll see you back on Thursday. Be in touch with me by email, and we'll all be good to go from there. Okay, thanks again, and have a good one. Bye-bye.